All right. Good evening. This is a call to order for a special meeting of the Bridgeport Board of Education. Today is Wednesday, January 15. It is 6:14 p.m. and we're at City Hall, the conference room 305. Joining us, I'm Jen Perez, chair of the board. We have Mr. Sokolovic, Mr. Benahan, Mr. Traber in person, Mr. Medina online, Ms. Casimir online. Yes. All right. And get started. Today we have an agenda item of the Freedom of Information Act presentation. And this training is going to be with Mr. Russell Blair. He's the Director of Education and Communications for the Connecticut Freedom of Information Commission. So whenever you're ready.
Okay. Can everyone on the computer can hear me, right? Just okay.
Yes.
So yeah, good evening. It's really good to be here. I do a lot of these training sessions, and I always appreciate when it's an invitation, because something you may not know is sometimes the commission orders FOI trainings, and I have to go and kind of do the remedial class when things have gone wrong. So it's nice when people realize, hey, we've got some questions, we want to have somebody come down and try to help us out. So I'm always happy to do that. And then the other thing I'll just mention in particular here, I know there's been some complaints that have been filed. Today is training. We can talk about the issues that have arisen, but just so everyone understands, we have a process, we have cases before the commission with hearing officers' reports. So today is not about making any kind of factual determinations about, if somebody was wrong or if something was a violation and all that. Today we're going to talk about, what the law requires for your public meetings. In particular, we'll touch on maybe a few things about records requests, depending on the timing and all that, but just want to, mention that off the top as well. So, with the Freedom of Information Act, one of the things that, I think is really important to know is that it can be difficult, as you may have experienced yourself. Most people that deal with FOI are not attorneys. I'm actually not an attorney either. A lot of people think, if you work at the FOI Commission, you must be an attorney, but my background is actually in journalism. So my experience with public meetings is covering them as a journalist. So I've, been at, many a Board of Education meeting. Actually, that was my first assignment when I started as a young reporter. I was working at the Record Journal, covered the town of Wallingford, went to a lot of Board of Education meetings. Just a quick little story you might find amusing. There was, I remember one meeting where there were all these parents there, and I was really excited because I was a young reporter, and I was like, oh, there must be this big issue going on. All the parents are here. I get the agenda of the meeting and I go, oh, it's awards presentation night. And they do all the awards, then everybody leaves, and then it's just me and, the lonely reporter in the room while they're doing their meetings. So very familiar with it from that aspect of things. But in practice, the FOI law can be difficult. So really my role at the commission is to provide training, provide education, to be a resource. So again, my contact information, we can take questions throughout the presentation. I find that that's easier. So if you have a question, just kind of raise your hand, on the people virtually, maybe we can just check in a few times throughout, or if, somebody's monitoring it and you see a question, just let me know, because I don't want you guys to be mistaken or to keep going on something if somebody has a question and wants a clarification or anything like that. So, again, with the Freedom of Information Act, it is the law. So, you want to do it correctly. And if you have questions tonight, if you have questions in the future, please don't hesitate to reach out. Okay. Not working. Too far away. Okay, there we go. Okay, so just another thing I think when I do these presentations, I like to just mention sort of briefly is a little bit about the history of the FOI Act. And one of the things I always like to mention is you see the year up there. This is the preamble from the Freedom of Information Act, and the law passed 1975, so 50 years ago. Today, or this year, we're actually celebrating the 50th anniversary of the passage of the FOI law. And one of the things that, I think is really important is to kind of understand, where this law came from. And really, if you look at the year there, if you're a student of history, this was really a post-Watergate reform. It was, across the country. Connecticut was not unique in passing a law like this, but Connecticut was one of the first to adopt a Freedom of Information law. And Connecticut's law is actually one of the strongest in the country, and it still remains, that way today. Governor El Abrazo was the real champion of passing the Freedom of Information Act in Connecticut. It's about government transparency. It's about allowing the citizens to have access to our records, to be able to come to our meetings, really to participate, in our democracy in an informed way. We want people to have access to the same information that their elected or appointed officials have when they're making decisions, so that people can understand, if they have a concern about the school budget, they can get financial information. They can figure out, what programs are being funded. They can come to a meeting and they can say, hey, I think we should put more funding towards this particular program. It allows people to come to meetings, to speak, to be informed, and to participate in that way. But what makes Connecticut kind of unique, and what I think is one of the, really the strongest aspects of our FOI law, is that when the FOI law passed back in 1975, along with it was the creation of the FOI Commission. So if you don't, know what the FOI Commission is, we are, a state agency, but we are really kind of independent, and we're small. We only have about 15 or 16 staff members, mostly attorneys. And really our sole job in the statute that's spelled out, our job is to investigate alleged violations of the Freedom of Information Act. So if somebody thinks that something went wrong with a records request, if somebody thinks that something went wrong with a public meeting, they file a complaint with our office. We received in excess of 850 complaints last year, so we are quite busy. The good news is a lot of the complaints, we do resolve them. We have an ombudsman program. So we try to, even when a complaint has been filed, try to work with the parties to resolve the issues if we can. If we can't resolve the issues, we have the power to hold hearings. We have other investigatory powers. We can request records, we can request information, we can subpoena witnesses, really to try to figure out, what happened and whether or not it was a violation of the Freedom of Information Act. And if we find a violation, we have different things we can do. As I mentioned earlier, we can order trainings. We can also issue fines. We don't do that all that often, but in some instances, if we think something was really egregious, we have the ability to fine. But in terms of meetings, something maybe people don't know about, one of the powers of the commission, and we don't do this all that often, but we can nullify votes that were taken at a meeting. So your board could take a vote on something, and if somebody filed a complaint and the commission looked at it and we realized that the agenda wasn't posted properly, or maybe something was done improperly in an executive session, we could come back, and this could be months later, we could say that wasn't done properly, we're wiping it out, you've got to go back and do it again. And you could just imagine the headaches that could cause. So really, with compliance with the FOI Act, it's important on a number of levels. One, it's the law, right? We all want to try to follow the law. Two, we hope that people support the concept. We hope people support, doing our work in public, providing, public access to records. But really, practically speaking, if you don't do it right and you wind up with an FOI complaint, it can just be something that becomes a huge headache. It can eat up a lot of time. It can eat up a lot of resources. You're having to have conversations with your attorney, you're having to come to a hearing maybe in Hartford, maybe your case has to get continued and you have to go to another hearing, and you might have to go to a commission meeting. And it can be something that, that could just become a bigger issue than it really needs to be. And what I find is a lot of times, through a little bit of education, a little bit of research, through, figuring out what you need to do, you can handle most of the issues that come up, without having to worry about complaints and without having to worry about going to hearings and all that. So really today is about, making you feel comfortable, understanding, the requirements, and also understanding, if you're not sure about something, it's okay to go seek help. It's okay to get clarification. It's okay to ask somebody, I'm not sure what we do here. Can you please help me out? Okay, so basics of the FOI law. There's really two parts of it: meetings and records. We will, mostly focus on meetings provisions, but we'll also touch on some of the records pieces too. With records requests, I think it's important to note that really the FOI law is about providing copies of the records that you keep, that you maintain, that you've created in the course of your service on the Board of Education. So all the things you receive in your packet, all the correspondence you send, correspondence that you receive, the financial information of the school board, and anything that touches on the public business, somebody can request under FOI. But you don't have to do research or create new documents. So it is not about having to, research a question or answer a question or create a new document. FOI is really sharing information. Now, as elected officials, you might go beyond that. You might, want to do research into something for somebody. You might want to answer questions from somebody. But the distinction with a records request is I can request records from you. And you have to have those records, and you're not creating the records. You're not going to other agencies to get those records. If a record exists with the state and not Bridgeport, tell the person you've got to go to the State Department of Education. They've got that data about test scores or something. It's not something that we keep. And then with public meetings, this is something that people often ask about. The FOI law is about attendance at public meetings. There's no law, FOI or otherwise, that requires boards and commissions to have public comment. I heard you guys just mentioning you have public comment on the agenda. I think that's good. I think the commission supports having that as available to residents. But because it's not required, it means that you can put restrictions on public comment. You could choose whether to have it or not. You can ask the people, identify themselves, give their address. You could put a limitation on how long people can speak. You could ask the people only address items that are on the agenda. Anything you want to do with public comment is up to you. You can, unless it's something that's set in a board policy, if you don't have a board policy, you could change it from meeting to meeting. I mentioned earlier, I was a reporter, in the city of Hartford, they do it, their city council, I believe the first meeting has public comment, the second meeting of the month doesn't. So different cities and towns do it different ways. So public comment, however you want to do that is up to you. And then the Freedom of Information Commission, we already, talked a little bit about that, but really, we're kind of the people that come in, the umpires that try to resolve a dispute and try to figure out, if something was a violation or not. And then if we determine that something was a violation, we issue an order and we have different remedies and things that we can do. On the records piece, we can order public agencies to produce, records. If they believe that they have to disclose them, we can look at it and say, well, actually those records need to be disclosed. And in some instances, depending on what happened, we may say, the records need to be disclosed and we can't charge any fees for it. So we have different abilities to do that. So sometimes people wonder who's covered by FOI. For you all, it's pretty simple. Board of Education is what is called a public agency under the law. I mostly just put the slide up there because I tend to use that word a lot when I'm speaking, so everyone understands. A public agency or an agency could be a division, department, a city department. Your Board of Education is a public agency. Subcommittees of your Board of Education, if you have any, are public agencies. You had a question?
I just want to know whether you want us to wait or ask questions.
Oh, if you want to ask questions as we're going, that's fine. Yeah, because do you have a question right now?
Yeah,
Sure.
We do allow public comments, and this came up recently. This sort of, as we developed a hybrid online participation, non-online, we discussed recently, people have the right, if we have hybrid meetings, we actually allow people to watch online now. People have the right to comment online.
So you don't,
Our rules say that you can come to the meeting and comment, and you can sign up to comment. Does that allow them to participate from online?
So if you have public comment at your meeting,
That's us to decide.
it's up to you. Yeah, it's up to you to decide how to do it. So, just to kind of give you an example, I know in some towns what they'll do is they'll say, look, if you want to do public comment on the Zoom meeting, we might ask you to email us ahead of time, and give us your name and stuff so that we can add you to the list and we kind of know what to expect, that sort of thing. But also the way that the remote meetings provision is written, if you do public comment in person, you're not required to do it for the online people. So you could say, if you want to comment at our meeting, you have to come in person, or you could say, we're going to do it online, but maybe we ask you to sign up ahead of time just so we know what to expect, in terms of people commenting. But it's a good question. So you could decide, how all that works. Okay, so, back to public agencies. Again, the one thing, I think is important for you all to understand is that, and it's in bold there, a public agency includes any committee of or created by any other public agency. So if the Bridgeport Board of Education, creates a subcommittee, or, you create a full building committee, you create a, whatever it is, a task force to look at something. If you create a committee, a task force, a subcommittee, whatever you call it, the name really doesn't matter. And if you were creating a group that is going to, basically you're delegating the work of the board to some other group, that group is going to also be subject to the Freedom of Information Act, regardless of who is on it. Now, there's a distinction, and we'll get into this when we talk about, what a meeting is. There's a distinction between a subcommittee and, board members kind of doing work between meetings. There are ways that you might have sort of these kind of ad hoc groups that get together, maybe, somebody said, Joe and Jen, before the next meeting, can you go talk to people in Stratford and get their numbers about their enrollment and come back to the meeting and report it to us. So you're allowed to do some kind of work between meetings. The real thing you can't do is you cannot have, these little subgroups that are a quorum of your board. And we'll kind of talk about how all that is in a second. But, generally speaking, standing subcommittees, if you create a special committee to deal with something, those groups are going to follow FOI as well. In rare instances, nonprofits can be covered under FOI. The Supreme Court case in Connecticut about this actually involves a school. Woodstock Academy, if you're at all familiar with that, is a private high school up in northeastern Connecticut, but they serve as a public high school. for students in that area because they don't have any at the public high school. So they were, ruled to be subject to FOIA, but generally it's only going to, arms of government. So we're going to start, again, as I said, going over the meetings provisions of FOI. Hopefully you don't find yourself like this at your board of education meetings, wondering how you're having the meeting. What I think is really key is to look at the definition of what a public meeting is. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this because I think it's really, yes.
Charter schools fall under the.
So a charter school, my understanding is that they do, they're board of whatever, usually they have like a board of governors or something like that. Then, then if they're doing basically with the functional equivalent of a public agency, are you doing governmental functions? And they're taking in public funds. If they're providing public education, then they're going to be, part of, the FOI world. So, that's the way the court will determine whether or not somebody is subject to FOI is, are you receiving government funding? Are you providing a government service? Is some kind of, government oversight, which usually, with most charter schools, I'm not an expert, but there usually is, there's some kind of.
No, they call public schools by law.
Yeah, so they are treated, treated.
They're covered by a different set of laws than we are. We assign one member of our board just to be a member of their board.
Mhm.
But I've never seen them post notices or follow and pay attention, so I can't say they don't, but I've never noticed.
Yeah, so I think that,
Post notices of meetings.
I think what's a little bit different with
I
charter.
haven't looked.
Yeah, I think what's a little bit different with charter schools is sometimes the governance structure is a little bit different. It's not like a board of education like you have here. It might be a different kind of group.
I'm saying they do.
Yeah, I know for a thing, I went into some of the training that they had last year, and I know that they have like an agenda, they have minutes and all that, so you can go back and read them and all that stuff. So I was trying to find if my name was on the list one time,
Mhm.
and so I saw some of the
I'm just curious whether they post notices of their meetings and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, so, I'll just say, without knowing all the specifics about the particular school that you're talking about, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there's charter schools out there that are not following everything that they're supposed to be doing. Like I haven't investigated that, but it's possible that they're supposed to be doing it and
Yeah.
they're not posting the agendas and all that. But the way, really what it comes down to is, when the commission gets so if you were to seek records about a charter school or you thought the board wasn't doing agendas or whatever, and somebody were to file a complaint, the first thing we would do is we would do that functional equivalence test. And here, I think there's they're providing public education, they're taking in public funds, there's not a, versus a private school that, obviously, a wholly private school, Yale University, you're not going to be able to do a FOIA to Yale University. So.
Just to acknowledge that Andre Woodson has also joined the meeting.
All right, so, what is a meeting under the law? So a meeting, really it's a specific, specific thing. And, the way I try to explain this to folks is there's kind of really, sort of like three triggers that you have to hit. And if you do these three things, then, you're in public meeting territory, which means, this should be a conversation happening at a meeting. It should not be email, it should not be text message. It should not be in the hallway before the meeting. It should not be in the parking lot after the meeting. And really the three things are convening or assembly of a quorum of a multi-member public agency. So your board is a multi-member public agency. So anytime we have a quorum of a multi-member public agency or any communication by or to a quorum of a multi-member public agency, whether in person or by means of electronic equipment, to discuss or act upon a matter of which the public agency has supervision, control, jurisdiction, or advisory power. So quorum is the first part. The second part is either we are gathered or communicating in person or electronically. And the third part, for shorthand, I like to refer to it as board business. So if we have a quorum of our board members, they're either gathered together or they're communicating electronically and they're discussing or acting upon board business, then that makes it a meeting. So what that means is inherently you cannot have conversations among a quorum or more of your board members about board business. Now, there are some exceptions to this. The number one exception, caucuses, which we can talk about in a second. But, if we had a situation, this is a classic, do not do this. If somebody sends the agenda out to everybody, and everyone's copied in an email. You don't want members to start jumping in and responding, saying, hey, that agenda item, that seems great. I think this is super. I'm going to vote for this. And somebody else says, no, that's a terrible idea. Why are we doing this? You know, you don't want to start your discussion that you would have at the meeting before you get to them. That's really the whole idea of open meetings, is that your deliberations, the dialogue, and not just the votes. Because again, a meeting, discussion or action, it's not just, you know, that we didn't vote. You talk about things that could be a violation too. Yes.
I don't even get into the exceptions in a minute, but far as getting together and discussing an agenda, even if we don't intend to act on anything, and if we, but possibility that it does fall within our purview, then we talk about it. Maybe we get together as a group of 5 or 6 and we discuss what's the best textbooks in the country, but there's no textbook on the agenda. That's still something that we should probably notice.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not just about things that are, you know, things that are on the agenda. It's really about, again, anything you have supervision, control, jurisdiction, or advisory power over. So, you know, I would look at that very broadly because, you know, like the example you're using about textbooks. So maybe there's nothing on the agenda about textbooks, but what if you guys have this conversation and then, you know, 2 months later, this item pops up and it says, we're going to purchase these textbooks. And somebody's like, well, where did this come from? Right. They never even talked about this. And now they're all saying these are the greatest textbooks in the world. And that's why they're going to buy them. So, you know, it doesn't matter if it's, you know, if it's even been something the board has considered yet. Really, if you're talking about things that involve decisions that you make, then those conversations need to be happening in public if it involves, you know, quorum or more of your board, unless, you know, there's one of those exceptions which we'll touch on.
Thank you.
Any other questions on that? So, again, quorum is really key, because the quorum is we have enough people to make a decision. We have enough people to vote on something. That's why we want to avoid those gatherings, because even unintentionally, you know, I feel the calls from people who have said, you know, well, you know, we weren't really meaning to make a decision. We just wanted to feel out people and get an idea of what might, you know, what we could expect to talk about at the meeting. But, you know, even inadvertently, you might start to lean one way or the other. Once you guys start talking about it, you know, people may, you know, have make their feelings known, and that could influence, you know, the outcome of what happens at the meeting.
Real quick, because you mentioned that, I know you look now, so I apologize, I didn't have my hand, but at the same time. So again, the word quorum is clear. So a board of 9 people, it's, you know, those 5.
Yep.
So 2 of them can get together,
Yes, exactly.
have a conversation, breakfast, whatever, and just hang out and talk.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. The only thing you can't do is we actually had a case on this and we have called it, the commission called it there's a Latin term I can't pronounce, but we call it a serial meeting. You can't have a situation where, like, if the budget was up for a vote, the chair cannot call every single member individually and say, are you going to vote for the budget? Are you going to vote for the budget? Are you going to vote? Because that in essence is a meeting. So, you know, it's not like you could have breakfast with every member and get them to agree with your one thing. If somehow somebody figured that out, you know, they could say, well, you know, that was intentional to circumvent, you know, the process. But, you know, if you've got a couple board members who, you know, have an idea and they want to work on it and they want to meet and discuss, absolutely. And then they can come to the next meeting and they can report out. You know, that's that's all fine.
Sorry, I just want to jump in for a little clarification because I don't believe she was here in the beginning part, and I'm not sure if it applies or not. Form of a committee.
So if it's a subcommittee, it's of the members of that subcommittee. So if your subcommittee is 5 people, the quorum is 3. It's not the quorum of the whole board.
And we can't come together to discuss that business unless we fall under the focusing on the stuff exemptions.
On the subcommittee, same thing. Yeah. So, you know, the smaller the board, then, you know, the smaller the quorum. So, you know, sometimes it can be difficult, you know, and, you know, where this comes up a lot of times, you know, it's not really maybe a Bridgeport problem, but, you know, small towns that have a 3-member board of selectmen, you know, they'll call me and they'll say, you're telling me I can't talk to the other selectmen because that's 2 of us. And, you know, if it's of the other party, really, you're not supposed to be, you know, even 2 of the 3 selectmen. If it's a Republican and a Democrat, really should not be talking about, you know, the business of the board, which in a board of selectmen, it's kind of everything because, you know, it's a small town, they're sort of in charge. So, you know, the idea here is not to make it, you know, impractical or hard to get your work done. The idea here is that you do your work in public. You know, and sometimes those subcommittee meetings, you might notice them and nobody might show up. You know, it's 10 a.m. and it's in a conference room at the high school, and it's you and some staff and you're going through something, curriculum or whatever it might be. And you might never, ever have, you know, somebody from the public that attends, but we still do the agendas. There's still open meetings. We still take minutes. Even if somebody doesn't come, then we want to read the minutes, so that they know what issues are going to be brought to the full board, for their approval. Okay, so, couple other sort of ground rules for meetings, and this is for all meetings, virtual or not. Anyone can attend a public meeting. They're not required to give their name, or sign in or anything like that. So in the virtual world, some people have asked me, do people have to give their name on Zoom? Our public meeting law says no. So if somebody, calls in and it shows up as a phone number and you say, hey, who is that on the phone? And they won't tell you, you can't just kick them out of the meeting because they won't identify themselves. You set your own rules for public comment. We already talked about that. Anyone can photograph, record, or broadcast a public meeting. I like to say, hopefully, if you're at a public meeting, you wouldn't say anything that you didn't want recorded. And it seems like you guys record your meetings anyway. But just be mindful the audience is allowed to record the meeting as long as you're not being disruptive. And agendas, we'll come back to that in a second. But I make a point just with agendas, to emphasize that, agendas are really for the public to make a decision about whether or not to attend a meeting. So you just want to make sure your agendas are clear. Now, this is kind of an interesting thing I use as an example. It actually involves a school board, and the other side of the state. There was a school board where they had an agenda item, and the agenda item was facilities update. They voted to close an elementary school, and there was an uproar in the community because people looked at the agenda and they saw facilities update, and they said, okay, right, what does that mean? Okay, and then the board votes to close the elementary school. There was 2 FOI complaints that were filed against us because they alleged the agenda was insufficient. And there was such a public blowback, they actually reversed the decision and they voted to keep the elementary school open. So the complaints kind of got mooted because they ended up not doing it. But that would be a classic example of what not to do. If you're going to vote to close an elementary school, presumably there's been a lot of conversation before it. And if you're going to take the vote, put it on the agenda, right? And people can come to the meeting, they can speak out, whatever they want to do. The agenda is there for the benefit of the public, so they know what you're doing. Don't try to obfuscate things by using, buzzwords or things like that. So email and meetings, we kind of already alluded to this, but, just be careful about your conversations, email, text message, Zoom, whatever it may be. If it's among a quorum or more board members, it's dealing with board business, then it's got to be done at a meeting, except for a few exceptions that we'll touch on. It is okay to be discussing administrative type things. Somebody says, hey, can you put this on the agenda for the meeting? You're trying to schedule a special meeting and see people's availability. You could also share information. It's not about a one-way communication. So if somebody says, hey, there was a, article in the Connecticut Post, I just want to share with everyone, it was a great, story about one of our programs. You can send those things out to all your board members, as long as it's not about, a discussion about what the board is going to do. So if you got a letter from a parent and you wanted to share it with the fellow board, the rest of the board and say, hey, just want everyone to be aware of this communication I received, you could do that, but it should not evolve into a discussion about what policies or procedures or action the board is going to take. That would happen at your next meeting. You could say, hey, we got this letter and we've decided, we do something about it. Okay. So the next thing that I want to talk about is the differences between a regular and special meeting, and sort of the requirements in terms of notices and minutes. We'll go into a little bit of a deeper detail in minutes in a second. But really, there's 2 main kinds of meetings: regular meetings and special meetings. So a regular meeting is a meeting that is on your regular meeting schedule. So at the start of every year, probably the end of last year, you guys developed a regular meeting schedule. You vote on it. You submit that, and that is your list of regular meetings for the year. So that's kind of set. Those are your regular meetings. And anytime you want to meet outside of your regular meeting schedule, you hold a special meeting. And really, the only thing that makes a special meeting special is the timing of it. There's a few differences that I'll touch on in a second, but regular meeting is it was on our calendar, special meeting is it wasn't on our calendar. And that could be that something happens and you have to move a meeting. So if your regular meeting gets snowed out, and you move it, that becomes a special meeting. It could be that you add meetings, maybe you only meet twice a month, but something comes up and you need to deal with it. You can schedule a special meeting. And also just to remember too, that if you change the time of your regular meeting, that also becomes a special meeting. So if you normally meet, at 7 o'clock, but I don't know, there's a big basketball game that night and you guys want to do it at 5 o'clock so people can get over there afterwards. At the high school, you could say, okay, we're going to make that a special meeting and we're going to do it at 5 o'clock. So, for your regular meetings, agendas need to be filed 24 hours in advance. Important to note that, agendas need to be filed when, when your offices are open. I don't run into this as much with boards of education, but sometimes in town halls, they might close on Friday or they close early on Friday or something like that. If your meeting is on Monday, your agenda's got to be filed on Friday. You can't, email it to somebody on Saturday or Sunday. It would not be, it would not be filed in time under the law. So special meeting, very similar, notice an agenda 24 hours in advance. All special meeting agendas do have to be posted to the website 24 hours in advance. Regular meeting agendas actually do not have to be posted on the website 24 hours ahead of time for municipalities and school board. I would strongly encourage you to post the agendas in a timely manner, because that's where people look to this. They're not frequently probably not coming into your office and looking to see the agenda there. They're going to look on the website first. But with regular meeting, if something happened and it didn't get posted, would not be a violation. But the special meeting, if it was not on the website 24 hours before the meeting, then the meeting would not be properly noticed. And you have a question?
You said, must be filed when the offices are open, so it should be filed before, if the office closes at 5, it's gotta be filed by 5.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Not 6:30 at night, because the meeting is at 6:30 on Monday.
No, it's got to be filed while they're open, because the idea is, and again, this is probably more applicable in a town hall, but the law is, applies the same. The idea would be if somebody were to come to the board offices before you close on Friday, they should be able to see the agendas for any meetings that are happening on Monday.
And that does not apply to the weekend. So if our regular meeting is Monday at 6:30, it's got to be filed on Friday at 5 o'clock.
Exactly, because with specifically what the agenda says is, what the law says with the agendas is they need to be filed and publicly available. So, I would argue if you email it on the weekend or after hours, well, it's not really filed unless, but then I've had some people say, well, what if somebody stays late and they stamp it in at 6:30? Okay, maybe it's filed, but it's not publicly available, right? Unless you guys are deciding to keep, the office is open late so somebody could come in, but so it just, again, yeah, close the business the day before your meeting. And also remember holidays, I don't know when you guys normally meet, but if you meet on Tuesdays, you got to really be mindful of those Monday holidays, because you may say, well, we just do it on Monday normally, but if it's Martin Luther King Day or something, then you'd have to be doing it the Friday before the Monday holiday, because Saturday, Sunday, Monday, they're all closed.
And you had several instances in the past year where we actually missed a notice, never got posted.
Mhm.
In the schedule that we submitted to the state for our meetings on Friday night, the notice just never got posted.
Mhm.
It seems to me that that's wrong.
Yeah, so what I would say in those instances is if that, it can be really frustrating, but if that happens, I really think the best advice is not to move forward with the meeting. Because
We didn't move forward with the meeting. I'm saying it's wring that the public was anticipating a meeting.
oh, I see.
Notice was just that the
The
agenda.
agenda was never
Never, so
Yeah.
the meeting never happened.
Yeah, again, that would, that I can understand the flip side of why it would be frustrating for the public for that to happen, but people make mistakes, we're all human, we forget to do things, we forget about a holiday or something like that, but if you move forward with a meeting where the agenda was never posted, it's kind of a surefire, opening for somebody to bring.
I'm not asking to move forward. I'm just saying it was intentionally done. And so is there any sort of, like, if you don't hold a meeting when a meeting is supposed to be held, is there any sort of?
Yeah, there really isn't, FOI doesn't, it's kind of interesting, because the law is all predicated on people getting to meetings. So, like sometimes people will call me and ask me, like, because it's kind of like cancellation. People sometimes ask me, is there a proper way to cancel a meeting? Our law doesn't really address that. So, it would be like similar to, you had a meeting date, you get there and we don't have a quorum and somebody's sick and whatever, and then we just can't have a meeting because we don't have a quorum. Frustrating for everybody involved, but you can't have a meeting without the quorum. So, not really, because our violation is somebody can't get to the meeting. So if the meeting never happens, then there's no recourse with FOI.
Quick follow-up on that last thing you said. Can't have a meeting without a quorum. This meeting was noticed. For a while, we had 4 people here.
Mhm.
Could that meeting not still be held and broadcast?
Well,
Information.
yeah, I shouldn't say that you can't have a meeting, you can't vote on anything. So, you could still be here, today it doesn't really matter because I'm not voting on anything, I don't think. So, you know, it's not like, oh, because we don't have a quorum, we all have to go home and tell Russell to drive back to Hartford, you know, but you can't vote on anything if you don't.
If we had action items like public comment and committee reports, we would be able to do that and get that out of the way. But just wouldn't be able to vote on it.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, what happens in some instances where, you know, what some towns will do is if they're in a situation like that and they don't have a quorum, you know, it's technically not a meeting. It's one of these gatherings of less than a quorum. You know, sometimes they'll just proceed with things like you mentioned, and then sometimes they'll even still submit minutes, even though it wasn't formally a meeting. We're just gonna, you know, submit the minutes of whatever we did, you know, just so people know what happened. And then at the next meeting, we're gonna have to take up the items that we couldn't get to because we couldn't vote on them.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, so, you know, the other difference between a regular meeting versus a special meeting is that at a regular meeting, you can, by a 2/3 vote, you can vote to add items to the agenda. So, you know, you often have new business. You can go around. Does anyone have any new business? And, you know, somebody could add something to the agenda and you guys could discuss it and you could potentially act on it if you wanted to. At a regular meeting. At a special meeting, you cannot add any new business to the agenda. So tonight, if, you know, something came up and somebody said, hey, you know, we've got this other thing that somebody raised, and we want to talk about it, you would not be able to add a new item for discussion today because we're at, you know, a special meeting. So just, you know, important to remember special meeting agendas, just double check everything's on there. You know, if somebody comes in late with something, it would, you know, unfortunately, you wouldn't be able to take it up at that meeting.
Committee meeting is considered a special meeting for those purposes, correct?
Like the subcommittees,
Yes.
unless they submit a regular meeting schedule. So a lot of subcommittees will just only do special meetings. But if you knew at the start of the year, hey, you know, we're doing a major high school renovation project and the school building subcommittee is going to meet twice a month, you could put those out and do a regular meeting schedule and have regular meetings. But, you know, if it's something where, you know, they just kind of meet as needed, then they would all be special
And
meetings.
so we would have to do the filing requirements with the same filing requirements we do for the regularly scheduled meetings.
For the subcommittee, if you wanted to have regular meetings, yeah, but you could also just operate with only special meetings
Right.
because some of your
I was
subcommittees.
thinking about adding agenda items. Sometimes things will come up before the meeting, but if we got the regular one scheduled, we could add by 2/3,
Mhm.
but if we don't have it scheduled, we can't add it. But
Yeah, you can't add things. So I think, you know, maybe what I would say is, you know, you look at, you know, different subcommittees you might have, and if you know there are ones that are gonna need to meet frequent, you know, because you could always cancel meetings. So you could always put a regular meeting on the calendar every month for a subcommittee. And then if they don't need to meet that month, you just put a notice, hey, you know, that subcommittee meeting for this month is canceled. Yes.
Right, we have established committees. We have 4 established committees right now.
Mhm.
And we have just set a regular meeting schedule for those 4 committees.
Okay.
So on this Wednesday of the month, my committee is gonna meet.
Mhm.
So is that a regular meeting or a special meeting?
Regular meeting, because you put a yearly schedule on,
For
right?
bylaws, there's special meetings.
Okay,
I can confirm that with, I believe.
no, but a little more clarity on that, but it's only filed on our website. It's not filed with the Secretary of State.
No, so it doesn't,
okay.
yeah, the statute is a little bit confusing. So the secretaries, anything to go to the Secretary of State is only for state agencies. So for you, it is it's your office, you know, it's making sure it goes to your board office, goes on your website, yeah, goes to the city clerk.
So it would need to be filed with the city clerk as a regular meeting,
If they're
If
not
it's not-
filed with the city clerk,
not a
the
regular.
regular meetings, then they're not. Well, I mean, our bylaws say there's special meetings. I'm.
Well, so your bylaws can call them special meetings. Under FOI, if it appears on our annual meeting schedule, it's a regular meeting. So
So if it appears on the annual meeting schedule, then for it to be proper, that has to be filed with the city clerk. That's how we would do it. I know we don't go to the Secretary of State.
yes, yeah. So you would file, so what's your subcommittee or your committee?
Instruction and student support.
Okay, so if you file at the start of the year, you know, these are the monthly meetings for the instruction and student support committee, then those are regular meetings. You know, we are gonna meet the 3rd Wednesday of every month, and you put all those out there, and then now those are regular meetings. So you could add something to, you know, and again, it doesn't mean, you know, you could,
That will override their bylaws.
well, if there's a conflict between bylaws and state statute, then, you know, I would go by, you know, under our statute, it is called a regular meeting if you put it on an annual meeting schedule. So.
But real quick to that, we could suspend our bylaws by 2/3 vote.
So
Yeah, so I mean, it will,
You guys.
yeah, I mean, what I
Yeah,
would
it's
say.
something else.
Yeah, I'm sorry, yeah.
If in the future you're cleaning up bylaws, maybe that's something to take a look at. You know, what I have told
just piqued
people,
my curiosity. I'm not.
what I've told people in different scenarios is, you know, if you're going through your bylaws and you're doing meeting stuff, I mean, you know, I'm not a bylaw expert, but I would think you could just kind of say, we will hold our meetings in accordance with the FOI law. You know, like that, you know, it's not like you have to, you know, we have a law that deals with public meetings. So unless you want to go beyond that, some places they want to be stricter. You know, if you want to say, look, we want to put it in our bylaws that we do public comment. We want to put it in our bylaws that we're always going to have remote access. You know, you can make stricter bylaws, but you know, everyone has to follow FOIA. Okay, so the last thing, and we'll talk more about, you know, what goes in the minutes in a second, but it's just a small distinction. You get regular meeting minutes need to be filed within 7 calendar days of the meeting, and special meeting minutes, you get 7 business days. So you get a little bit more time to do the minutes for tonight. Again, I don't know why they made that distinction, but 7 calendar days, regular meeting, 7 business days, special meeting. There is a third type of meeting. It doesn't come up all that often, and it is called an emergency meeting. And you know, the name sort of explains it, right? It's only in the event of an emergency. And our Supreme Court actually looked at this issue in a case involving the town of Ridgefield a number of years ago. And what our Supreme Court said was, you know, basically, you know, an emergency meeting is an unnoticed meeting. There's no notice and there's no agenda. So, you know, what is an emergency? Well, our Supreme Court said it's got to be something that is unexpected and it demands immediate action that makes it impossible to give a 24-hour notice for a special meeting. So really, you know, we are thinking about situations of, you know, a lot of times it's going to be, you know, maybe there's a major weather event or some kind of safety issue, you know, maybe during COVID when there were decisions having to be made very quickly about, you know, remote learning and closing schools. It's something where, you know, the issue is so pressing that we cannot wait 24 hours to hold a special meeting. So it is an option, you know, should really be used sparingly. And if you do have an emergency meeting, then the minutes of the emergency meeting need to be filed within 72 hours of the meeting. They have to be posted online, and you have to state the reason for the emergency in the minutes. So again, it's an option that's available if something really, you know, really dire comes up, but you know, really reserved for, you know, those sort of situations that, again, you know, if we wait 24 hours, there's going to be some sort of consequence. You know, there's, you know, 4 feet of snow on the roof of the school, and we have to hire a contractor to come out here and, you know, clear it off, or the roof is going to collapse or something like that. Okay, so, and then we kind of alluded to this a few times, but this is what I like to call, when is a meeting not a meeting? So earlier we talked about, you know, quorum is really kind of the key thing. So there are a few times when that really doesn't apply. So there are some instances where you would be allowed to have a quorum or more of your board members talking about things that you know, may pertain to board business. You know, in a couple of these instances. So the first one I'll talk about is caucuses, because that's the one that comes up most frequently. So a caucus is actually defined in the FOI law, and there's 2 different types of caucuses. The first is, you know, members of the same board of the same political party. So, you know, Democrats on the Board of Education, they are a caucus. No matter how many of them there are, they can meet, even if it's a majority, and they can discuss whatever they want under the sun, because the law doesn't limit what you can talk about in a caucus. You know, my understanding of this is that the reason we have this caucus exemption is really that when the General Assembly was passing the FOI law, somebody said, hey, wait a second, what about our caucuses, right? If you've ever spent any time up at the Capitol, you know they're caucusing all the time. I used to be a reporter, as I mentioned, you know, I would cover the Capitol sometimes, and, you know, you'd look at the calendar and, oh, you know, the House is going to come in at 10 a.m. and they wouldn't take up any bills until about noon because they'd be in caucus for 2 hours. So, you know, it applies to them. It also applies to you. So, you know, members of the same board and same political party. The other option is if you have a majority of a board that maybe is made up of, you know, there might be the Democrats, and maybe there was a petitioning candidate, or there was an unaffiliated candidate that was, you know, endorsed by the Democrats, or a minor party candidate, or working families, whatever it might be. If somebody is not, you know, within the same party as the other people in the caucus, then the law does require you to register your caucus and say, you know, for the term on the Board of Education, you know, the majority caucus is, you know, the 4 Democrats and the 1, you know, working families member, and then you register that. And then for the purposes of FOI, those people are allowed to caucus, and even though one of them is from a different party, they can be in on those conversations. Yes.
So if they are registered Democrats, but got their seat on the board through a third party, independent or working family, does the same thing? Or
If there, it goes by party affiliation. So if you are a registered Democrat, then you can caucus with other registered Democrats. If you were registered working families, then you would have to file just to say, I am working families, but I'm registered, I'm going to caucus with the Democrats on the Board of Education.
I'm gonna throw a quick scenario to get some clarity on something. Say we are a 5-member board, which we are not, and all 5 of us sitting here.
Mhm.
And we happen to be all Democrats, there's no minority party representation. Say we don't want Mr. Benahan and her caucus. Can the 4 of us caucus without the 5th Democrat?
So, yes. So, I mean, I think you could, that becomes more of an issue of kind of, like, I don't think you could prohibit him from joining your caucus. If you guys wanted to be mean and decide not to invite him, to your caucus, it wouldn't be an FOI, violation. It's not like every member has to be there, but, I think he would have a right to participate. It's not like you could tell him, no, you have to go away, you can't be here. If he's part of the caucus, then, he can participate in the discussions, but if, somebody gets left out, that wouldn't be a violation.
Do we have any obligation to tell Mr. Benahan would be?
I mean, it's kind of outside the scope of the FOI. It doesn't, it's not really addressed. So, it's your, I've gotten that issue before though. There in some towns, people have asked me, actually got calls from people, saying, can we caucus without one of our members because we don't want to have the person there. But, that's a board interpersonal political kind of thing. So
Let's follow up on that. Does the caucusing include committees as well?
So you're saying could the members of a committee caucus?
Correct.
Yes, so the members of a committee could caucus, but what I think is you want to be careful of is you cannot have caucuses across, different boards. So what that means is, if so I think in the committee it probably wouldn't apply, but like I'll give you another example of, sometimes people ask about this. It's the same board meeting, like you cannot bring the Democrats on the city council to the Board of Education caucus of the Democrats because we're all Democrats. You could have a caucus on your subcommittees, might be smaller, but yeah, same rule would apply there. But yeah, you don't want to be crossing other boards, bringing other people in. You can't be bringing in the town chairman or anything like that, because unless that person is on the board, but if they're not on the board, then, they are not a party to the caucus.
Thank you.
Yep. So, and then there's a couple other instances where, you guys maybe potentially would be involved in discussions that would not have to take place at a public meeting. The first is a personnel search committee. So, this comes up most often in the context of, for school boards of looking for a superintendent. So, you can create a personnel search committee and the board can, pick whoever they want to be on that personnel search committee. In some cases, the board will make the board the personnel search committee, and you're allowed to do that. So you could say all of us board members, we are the personnel search committee. And while you are meeting as a personnel search committee, or while the personnel search committee you've created is meeting, they don't have to notice the meetings, they don't have to do agendas or minutes or any of that. But the only thing that they're supposed to do is come up with a recommendation for a candidate or candidates for that position. And then those candidates go through the normal process, of the board with, an interview maybe and a public vote and all that. So a search committee can meet outside of FOI, but the only thing they're supposed to do is come up with candidates for that position. It should not be an opportunity to discuss other issues that might be pending before the board. Strategy or negotiations related to collective bargaining. This basically means that, if there was an instance where, the whole board wanted to sit down with the union leaders to talk about a contract, they could do that if they wanted to. It doesn't mean that you can only have meetings, to discuss collective bargaining with, smaller groups of the board. If the whole board wanted to be in one of those meetings, they would be allowed to do that. If it pertained to strategy or negotiation. Certainly, again, like voting on a contract, those are votes that you have to take up at your regular, meetings to the normal course of business. Staff meetings, that just means that, a meeting of public agency staff is not a public meeting, so meetings of school staff are not public meetings. And then chancellor social meetings. What this means is, the law recognizes and allows that, there might be times when a quorum of a board is going to be at, some sort of event and they're going to be gathered there together. And the event is not for the purposes of discussing board business. It might be that you guys go to the high school graduation, you go to a high school football game, you go to whatever it is, community event that's going on. The key thing though is everything we talked about with not discussing your board business, among a quorum still applies. So the whole Board of Education is sitting up there, on the stage at graduation, they shouldn't be passing notes back and forth about the budget or something like that. Does anyone have any questions on any of that?
Yeah, I get it. Recently got, some community forums. I believe I asked you about this now. It's run by the superintendent,
Mhm.
but can a board member or should a board member participate as a public participant and ask questions or?
Yeah, so sometimes people ask about this, sort of like in the context of, sometimes where it comes up is like meetings of other boards and can I go and can I speak at public comment? And the way I try to look at it is, you don't lose your right as kind of like a citizen just because you're on a board. So if there's a public meeting, there's an event that you want to go to and you want to speak, even if you want to speak as a board member, I don't think there's any issue with that. The issue would be, if you do this forum, get to know the new superintendent kind of thing, and all the board members want to go to just support the program, that's fine. But you wouldn't want to all be sitting in the back row and talking about, other board business while you're in that setting. So it's not that you can't go to those types of meetings. It's not that you couldn't speak in public comment, at a meeting like that. It's really about the discussion among the board members. So, if you were to ask a question of the superintendent and you get an answer, and then you go back to your seat and you're talking with everyone else about what the superintendent said, that would be where the issue would be, not that you're asking a question at the public meeting.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Yes. You said, like the forum, your example, Joe, that, he could speak as a board member. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm just saying that him as one board member speaking about board business does not make a meeting. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying you may think it might not be proper according to whatever, your determination is, but from an FOI perspective.
He could speak as a board member, but not on behalf of the board. It's kind of like what.
Yeah, that's kind of the policy. Yeah, no, yeah, I'm not saying that he's representing the board, but he can go and he can say, hi, I'm Joe. I'm on the Board of Education. I'm here tonight, to support our new superintendent. Blah, 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 blah.
Representations of the board as a whole.
Yeah, but that's again, that's not a.
Make sure I understood clearly.
Yeah. Again, everything I say you can and can't do, it's about FOI. You guys may have other things about, what you would like, board members to do or, or not do. Like I know a lot of times, they'll if somebody, writes to a board member, they'll funnel it to the chairperson to respond, or they'll ask the superintendent, to respond.
To do something what they're supposed
Yeah,
to do.
but the communication to the board member is not, it's not improper for someone to email one Board of Education member and ask them a question or something. How the response happens might be your, the way that you handle it.
But representing what the board is doing at that time is not making board business.
No,
The superintendent is speaking about the budget process, and a board member who speaks to that process is not doing board business.
no, and even if it was, it's only one member, so it's not, so I think, again, the thing with those types of events is, you can go, you can ask questions, whatever you want to do, but if there was a quorum or more board members there, they could not be discussing what, like, let's say the event went really poorly. They should not all be out in the hallway afterwards saying, oh my God, what's going on with this person? We got to do something. We got to have an executive session and talk to him about what's going, like that would be what you wouldn't want to do. If you go and you observe and you listen and maybe you ask a question or you speak to people, that's the kind of where the line is there. Okay, so, those are the sort of the carve outs to the meetings provisions of FOI. Minutes. So, with minutes, what I think is really important to know is that minutes do not need to really be a re-encapsulation of the entire meeting. And I mean no disrespect to our minutes takers, but really the legal requirements for minutes are very, very sparse. Really, the minutes are meant to be a record of the votes. So legal minutes, all you have to have is a recording of who voted for what or for whom. So you do need to identify, how members voted. So if something is not unanimous, you want to identify, who the nay votes were in the minutes there. You do have to include the attendance of the board members. So, who was in attendance at the meeting. Also, if you do have, hybrid meetings like this, you should note, who participated remotely, in the meeting. Other than that, if you have an executive session, you need to include anyone who attended the executive session besides the board members. So really the content of the meeting, how much detail you go into is really up to you. The most important thing is you have to get the minutes filed within 7 days. So most people are pretty good about finding the balance of where, they can achieve something that is, is representative of the meeting, but they get it done in a timely, timely manner. If your minutes were, super, super detailed and they were 12 pages single spaced and they really were, really, really great, but they were filed 3 weeks after the meeting, the FOI commission would say, well, we're sorry, but, these are great minutes, but they were late. So the number one thing with minutes is you want to get them in on time. Interestingly enough, I think I might have mentioned this earlier with agendas. It's the same thing for minutes. The law does not actually require minutes of municipal boards and commissions to be posted on the website. I will say that is where people look for them. So again, try to post them on the website in a timely manner. But I've had people who have called me and they say, look, there was a meeting last week. The minutes aren't on the website. How do I file an FOI complaint? And the first thing I tell them is, well, you should call, the board office because they might be there. It might be that they're in the office, they're available. They just haven't gotten posted to the website, and that would be okay. But try to post them on the website, in a timely manner. Minutes are still required, even if there's a recording of the video available. Even if it's a virtual meeting and you record it, you still do minutes. We do minutes for every meeting. If there's a recording, the minutes might be shorter because you could always put a link to the recording in the minutes, for example, if you wanted to. So our law doesn't really address the approval process of minutes, but sometimes people ask about that. I find that, the best way to do it, at least in my opinion, is put them on the agenda for the next meeting, discuss them there, if there need to be any changes that are made, you can vote to make the changes, adopt the minutes, and then in that set of minutes from that meeting, you could, note that they were adopted with the following changes. When we talked earlier about, discussions of board business, I get in this question sometimes, even discussing changes to the minutes is actually board business. So, if you're approving the minutes, it should be on the agenda of the meeting. It should not be something done, over email, and taking a vote or anything that way. Anyone have any questions on minutes? So electronic and remote meetings. What I usually tell people with this is, there's a couple things I want to highlight, but if you have other questions, happy to entertain them. But if you really want to get a deep dive on our website, we have what is called our remote meetings primer. And it really kind of goes into really sort of painstaking detail about the provisions in the law about remote meetings. And, the remote meeting section of the law, they tried to take into account all these different, scenarios that could happen. So there's things in there that I really won't get into a lot of detail about, but, it's like things like, what do we do if we lose the internet connection when we get it back and, we have to reboot the meeting and, what happens if, a member loses their connection, but we didn't lose a quorum, do we have to wait for the person to get back? So there's all these different things that are kind of all spelled out in there. And again, if people have questions, happy to answer them once we go through this, but I'm just going to highlight a few of the things that I think are important to know. The first is if you want to have, whether or not you want to have remote meetings is up to you. That is a policy decision. It is not required that you have remote access to your meetings. I will say, as you probably well know, I think people got used to this during COVID, and I think people kind of like it. I think people like that they can either go and watch the recording afterwards, or they can, watch along from home while it's ongoing. Board members probably like it too. It provides for flexibility. If they can't make it on a particular evening, they have childcare issues, wherever it might be, they can still participate if something comes up. But it is up to you how you have your meetings. So you can have in-person meetings, you can have hybrid meetings, you can have fully virtual meetings. Really, the way I want you all to think about it is if we want to do electronic meetings, there's just some extra rules that we have to follow. So the first is, if you're going to have one of your regular meetings, so one of your regular monthly board meetings is going to be either hybrid or fully remote. There's going to be some sort of, the law calls it electronic access. There's going to be some kind of electronic access to the meeting. 48 hours before the meeting, and again, this goes with the same thing we talked about with the 24 and the filing and all that, but this is 48. You have to post a notice that has the instructions on how somebody can attend that meeting electronically. So essentially, the link to how people can get it, the WebEx, the Zoom, whatever the virtual option is, that information needs to be out there 48 hours ahead of time. The reason for that is that the law has a period of time where if somebody does not have, access to technology and they can't get to, maybe it's a solely remote meeting and they don't have the technology, the public agency is supposed to make accommodations for that person. So that could be something where you tell them, hey, you can go to the library and you can watch the meeting there, or, you can come to our offices and we'll have somebody there with a laptop and you can watch the meeting, whatever it might be. Obviously, if there's an in-person option, then, people can always just come in person. So, that doesn't, pose as much of an issue. So I feel like hybrid seems to be kind of a good middle ground. People seem to like that. People sometimes ask about recording of meetings. Do we have to record our virtual meetings? The only meetings that you have to record in terms of virtual meetings are online only regular meetings. So if you decided, for 1 month, your regular board meetings were only going to be online, let's say it's February and we've got a lot of snow and you're just thinking, well, let's just do these meetings online so we can make sure they don't get canceled. If you did that, then you would have to make sure those meetings get recorded, and you would have to post that recording on your website within 7 days, and the recording would have to remain available on your website for at least 45 days. So if you want to record meetings other than those, solely online regular meetings, you could certainly do that. That's up to you, but it's not required by the law. You still submit minutes, even if a recording is available. Minutes, again, are the permanent record of what transpired at the meeting. So you want to make sure that you submit your minutes. And then the last thing I always try to share on remote meetings is that, if people are being unruly or they're being disrespectful or acting up online, you have the right to run an orderly meeting. And that means that, if people are talking and you can't hear yourselves think, you could mute them, you could kick them out, maybe give them a warning first. But, people do not have the right to interrupt your online meetings. It's the same way at an in-person meeting. If people were yelling and screaming and they wouldn't stop talking and you guys couldn't do your business, sometimes I don't know if this has ever happened, hopefully not, but, I know of meetings where they've had to get the police involved. They've had to get the police in there to escort somebody out because they wouldn't, they were so agitated about something. In the online world, it's a lot easier because we just kind of click a button and they go away. So, again, if something gets out of hand, you have the right to run an orderly meeting there. Does anyone have any questions on electronic meetings? Yeah.
It's not electronic. I missed the minutes part, and it's triggered by this comment here. How long minutes are required to be available?
So minutes are supposed to be kept indefinitely. It doesn't mean on the website forever, but the records retention schedules, the state library is in charge of records retention. It's kind of similar to FOIA, but it's not us. We can't do anything about records retention, but the state does say minutes you're supposed to keep forever. So, a copy of them doesn't mean every one of you has to keep the minutes forever, but the district should retain a copy of the minutes. Doesn't mean it's on the website. It's not like you have to keep your minutes from 12 years ago on the website, but, they should be filed somewhere where somebody could, thank you, where somebody could get them.
I'm fine.
Thank you, sir.
I want to make sure if he wants some water, he has some
Thank
water.
you.
He's sitting up there talking the whole time.
It's funny. I actually did this for the city of Bridgeport this morning. So this is my second. That was virtual.
Your second run here?
My second run through.
The city doesn't do it. We do all our meetings online, and they're available on YouTube for people to watch after the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
So the city doesn't do that.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that having the virtual, having recordings accessible is a good idea, but again, it's not required. So it's a decision, you get to make there. But I do know a lot of, places invested in all this equipment during COVID. So my argument has always kind of been, well, if you bought all this stuff and you were doing it, and you can still do it, I think it does provide a level of access that.
Well, a lot of people avail themselves to knowing that they can watch our meeting later. And so they either go online, don't come to our meetings, but know they can watch them from home, or they watch them later knowing that they're at work and they watch the meeting later. So it's you actually can watch the number go up of who's viewed the meetings.
Yeah. And so, as I said, right now, there's not a requirement that you have to do it, but there's been some discussions at the legislature, not necessarily about mandatory online meetings, but some of these things about remote meetings may change because I think we're all kind of still learning as we're going. I know now it's been hard to believe we're coming up on 5 years, since COVID, but I think we still are sort of figuring out, what works best, what do people like. So that's something that you guys can kind of develop as you go, what seems to be the best way to do it. Any other questions on electronic meetings? All right, so executive session. This is probably the part of FOI in terms of meetings that is really the most difficult, and that is because it really requires the most judgment. Some of the other things are really cut and dry. Agenda is either filed or not filed. Minutes are 7 days or you're late. Executive session, sometimes it can require discretion, to decide, does this fit in? Can we do this in an executive session? That's a very common, call that I get from people is, someone asking, hey, this is what we want to do. Can we do this in executive session or not? So what I'll say just for starters is, really the idea of executive session is, we are talking about something in a closed session for, really a good reason, not because it's embarrassing, not because it's a difficult conversation, not because, we don't want the public to know about this. Really, as we go through these and we talk about them, I think you'll kind of understand the idea is really a lot of times it's for the benefit of the district and for the residents. You don't have to talk about your legal strategy in public. You don't have to talk about sensitive school security matters in public. It's really kind of about protecting the interests of the district. It's not about avoiding those tough conversations or having to, giving you the ability to make decisions and things like that without public knowledge. So, it really, if you think about it, executive session is contrary to the whole idea of FOI, right? The whole idea of FOI is everything done in public. But the legislature recognized there might be certain things that, it makes more sense to discuss it in a closed session. The other thing I'll just note, with this is that, executive session is an option. So it doesn't mean you have to talk about these things in an executive session. If there was some sort of personnel issue and it was so urgent and so big of a thing, you could decide that we want to talk about it, in public, that there was some issue that happened that everyone knew about. It was all over the newspaper. You could say, we're going to talk about it in public because everyone knows what happened or because we think it's important or we want to be transparent. So it doesn't mean that if it is one of these things, you have to talk about it in the executive session. It's an option to you. More often than not, you probably choose that, but I just mentioned that. So the first thing you can talk about in executive session, you can talk about personnel matters. And, this can be personnel matters, as discussion of, an employee, or it could also be a public officer. So it can also be about a board member. So the things, what is a personnel matter? Well, it's discussing the appointment, the employment, the evaluation, the health, or the dismissal of any, employee or board member. And what's really important is if you're going to discuss somebody in an executive session, you have to notify the person. And the reason for that is that under the law, they have the right to basically demand that the discussion happen in open session instead. And if that happens, the board has no choice. They have to, if they're going to proceed with the item, they have to proceed in public session. So, if there was a disciplinary matter involving, a teacher and it came before your board and you tell the teacher, hey, Mr. Jones, there's something's going on, there's an investigation involving you, we want you to come to the executive session to talk about what happened. If Mr. Jones says, no, I would prefer that we do that in public, then the board would have to talk about it in public. So that is personnel matters. Yes.
You said it twice, but I read it differently in what it says there. Person being discussed can request open session. So technically is can demand open session because if they ask
Yeah, maybe that's a better term. Yeah. Maybe it should say demand instead of request. But yeah, if they ask for it, then it has to be done. Yes.
get a choice.
Yeah, exactly.
But on the flip side, they can't demand executive session.
No, they cannot demand executive session. It's up to the board. Again, if there was something happened that was really bad and you said, well, everyone already knows and we want to do it in public, the person can't come to you and say, you have to talk about me in executive session. Different people have different rights under the FOI law. And really what that is it's a right extended to public employees to say, your boards can't talk about you privately without you kind of giving them an okay. Yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong. The way you said that you talk about any staff, but the staff decide, no, let's do it in public. We cannot say, no, we go to second section, right?
No, you cannot. Yeah. So if the person if the person says I want it in public, then you have to do it in public.
But if we say, no, we have to do a second section because of the situation, and we decide, let's say, like you said just a few minutes ago, what is the difference? Because we say, no, we have to do a second section because, the situation, that cannot.
If it's about a personnel matter, then they have the ability to request the open session. So doesn't mean these other things, so if it's a security issue, it doesn't mean somebody can come in and say, no, you have to talk about a security issue in public session. It's more about if you were talking about, my job, then I get to decide whether you get to do that in public or, or whether you do that, behind closed doors or not, is essentially how it works. So.
All right,
We
thank
have
you.
an online question. Mr. Woodson?
Yes, I have a quick question. Can a board member request that a person who is an employee of the district, can we request that, like, say they have an employee of the district has a clause in their contract where they have to have a meeting, an executive session. Can a board member request that it be in public?
So somebody has a clause in their contract that they have that, what needs to be done in executive session?
Whatever discussion has to be done in executive session.
I mean, I guess if the board, I mean, you know, I think if the board approves it's kind of like the board approved the contract and they've tied the hands of the board and potentially maybe a future board. You know, I'm not an expert in contract law, but, you know, I think if the board agreed to that, then, you know, I think it couldn't be the inverse. You know, I think that you know, if somebody had in their contract that said, you know, you have to discuss my employment matters in executive session, then, you know, again, I'm not an expert in contract law, but I think that would be, you know, it would force the board to do it. You know, our law doesn't require you to do it. Now you've got a contract that's requiring you to do it. Now, I don't know if the contract is like afoul of FOI, and that's where I don't want to make a legal determination about that. But, you know, you could not have the inverse that says, you know, that, you know, you're going to, you know, deny somebody the opportunity to talk about it in public if they make that, you know.
Before you say anything, we're not gonna specifically talk about anybody's
No, we're just
contract.
talking- no, we're just talking about
We're not getting specific
general,
about,
general.
okay. Andre, do you still have?
Yes, I have another question. Can a board member like go to the state board meeting and speak as a member of the board, like as representing the board?
So that would, I mean, that's kind of outside the scope of FOI. You know, that's not really something that, you know, it's not a violation of our law in any way, but, you know, certainly you guys might have policies or procedures, or, you know, somebody might not think it's a good idea, but it's not an FOI issue. It might be an issue elsewhere, but it would not be, you know, our law doesn't really address whether, you know, it's allowed or not. So it's not an issue for FOI.
Any other questions? Mr. Woodson? You're done? Thank you.
I just don't want to forget, my question.
Go ahead.
General thing. Can a contract supersede FOIA? For instance, if there is a contract that has language that has to be discussed in executive session, can you go into executive session with less than 2/3 of a vote?
So you can't go into an executive session with less than 2/3 of
No
the vote.
matter what the.
That is state statute, and I don't believe that you could have a contract that would override,
Right.
you know, that would override that. What I'll say is that, and
Suit on the other side.
this is kind of, you know, this is an issue that has come up, but this is sort of larger, and this is at the state level, and this is not the local level. There have been times at the state level where our legislature has approved contracts, and there have been clauses that have superseded, you know, the FOI law, but that's because they're the state legislature. So the state legislature can, you know, if they wanted to approve this came up with the state police, there was a contract that was approved. I think it has since been changed, but they had a provision in their contract that said that they would not disclose any internal investigation reports where there was not a finding of wrongdoing. So that was counter to the FOI law, but because the state lawmakers passed it, it was a supersedence of the FOI law. But I don't believe that you could locally have a contract or an ordinance or a rule or anything that says, you know, we can go into executive session with less than a 2/3 vote.
Right. And on the same vein, this actually has more to do with records and other types of contracts, like say a vendor or somebody wanted to say, you can never disclose the cost of our contract. You can never.
So there is an exemption, you know, and we could talk about some of this when we get to records. There is an exemption for something that's called a trade secret that may potentially fall under that, depending, but you would be the ones to make the judgment. You know, the company can say, we think this is a trade secret, and it might be a trade secret under FOI, but there's kind of an analysis that has to happen, and you guys would be the ones to make that determination.
But in general, if we buy textbooks and they cost $3,000 or professional development.
Yeah, in general, it's not going to
discount from somebody.
In general, it's not going to be cost amounts. It's more likely that, you know, it might come up in the context of like intellectual property or, you know, really trade secret, if somebody's kind of sharing, proprietary information about their products, about their services, those kind of things that somebody is, again, that you're not, providing the intellectual property of a business, to somebody under FOIA. Their competitors cannot, FOI the details about their products that they're sharing with you because you're a customer, or maybe something like that. But I don't think a cost, like the cost to the district, what the district paid, those types of things would be, would probably not, be a trade secret. If for some reason the company shares financial information about how they're doing, hey, look at all this money we're making and this is our balance sheet, maybe that's a trade secret, right? They share that with you or something. But we can touch on that. So just to get back to the reasons for executive session, personnel, we covered that. Pending claims or litigation, the key word in there is pending. So really, this is either something has been filed or it could be the board is considering taking some kind of legal action. But it is not, free range sort of legal Q&A. Pending claims or litigation, if that is on the agenda, it means that there should be, something has been filed. You've received a demand letter, maybe somebody has, intimated they're going to sue the district. They sent a letter, they're asking for something. If they're saying if they don't get it, they'll go to court. Could be an FOI complaint, CHRO complaint. And again, it could also be the board, considering the board is going to go to court over something and they want to talk about whether or not they're going to file a lawsuit or something. They could talk about that in an executive session. You can have an executive session to discuss security matters. If you are concerned that a public discussion would compromise the security issue. Unfortunately, this came up a lot at boards of education after Sandy Hook. There were a lot of conversations, hard conversations about security measures and cameras and all the things we were doing to protect the students. Obviously makes sense, right? We don't want to have that done, publicly because, a bad actor potentially could hear what we're doing to, protect the students and use that to commit some sort of, crime or act of violence. So security matters, you can talk about that in executive session. You can discuss the sale or lease of property if there's a concern that publicity would impact the price point. The way to think of this is, maybe there's a piece of land, on the market that you guys look at it and you say, gee, we need to build a new athletic complex and this place seems like it would be really good. And, you haven't made the offer yet. And, really the idea is you're not tipping off other people in the community that the city is about to put in an offer to buy this land. If you had to talk about everything in public before you put the offer in, then, somebody else could come in and they could put the offer in, the price goes up because now you're in a bidding war with, a business or something like that. And then the last one is really the broadest exemption. You can discuss any records that are exempt from FOI in an executive session, which makes sense, right? If we wouldn't have to disclose it under FOIA, we're not required to publicly, discuss and debate it, in a public session. Where this comes up a lot in the context of school districts, obviously you guys know FERPA. So if you're ever having any conversations or sessions or dealings with, in particular student information, sometimes this comes up like with expulsion hearings, it's a proceeding, but it's done in a closed session because, necessarily you're having to disclose and share, identifying information about, about a student. It could also be attorney-client privilege. You receive the legal communication from your attorney and you want to have an executive session to review that. You could discuss that. We'll talk more about, different exemptions in a second, but if it's something that you wouldn't disclose under FOIA, you could discuss it in an executive session in a meeting.
There's a quick question about expulsion hearings. We used to post them and notice them, but we haven't in quite a while.
So I think it depends on, so this is kind of something that, I'm not an expert on it, but I know in the education statutes, there's kind of a couple different ways that you can do an expulsion hearing. I think it might depend on how you do it, because I think it's either you can do like a panel or you can like have assign somebody as as the person to do it. I think, I can check on that for you and get you the exact answer because I'm not, I'm not certain. I do see them in some districts, I see them, in other ones I don't. And, my understanding was, I think it kind of depends on, how you do it. And also it may depend on, the number of people that are there, if it's less than if it's only one or two board members that, so it might, I generally, it's one of those things where it's a closed session anyway. So, I can check on that for you, but I think
I'm just curious.
Yeah, because the expulsion hearings are kind of, the other thing that comes up sometimes is sometimes when things are really, created and addressed in other statutes, they kind of don't fall within our jurisdiction. Like this is kind of an interesting one that we learned about recently. So you may know there's an exemption in the or it's actually not in the FOI law. There's an exemption in the education statutes that talks about how teacher evaluations are not FOIAble. So I actually learned a little bit more about this. It's actually that they're not considered public records under the law. So we've got a case ongoing right now that's actually kind of interesting, where it's somebody who worked in a school district and is trying to get a copy of his own evaluation, and they are not giving it to him for some reason. And he brought a complaint to the FOI commission. It might get dismissed because it's not even a public record. Even though this person worked in the district, they're not giving it to him, but we can't do anything because it's outside of our scope. So the expulsion hearings, I think that might be something that is kind of outside of our scope. They're not a public meeting. It's an expulsion hearing according to those those statutes. So.
Records exempt from FOIA. Are draft documents exempt? Like,
Yeah, that is an exemption. Yep. We'll talk about that in a second. Okay. So, some other things, quickly on executive session. Need a 2/3 vote to go into executive session. So make sure you do that. Make sure you record that in the minutes. You cannot vote in executive session. Hopefully we all know that. You can invite in anyone that you want to assist you into the executive session, provided that they're there providing their opinion, they're providing their testimony, they're answering your questions. We had a case recently involving a school board where we said that even the superintendent, if the superintendent comes into the executive session, but they're not participating, even the presence of the superintendent is not allowed. So anyone you bring into the executive session, they should be there, as an active participant. They're listening, they're asking questions, they're offering you opinion, expertise, advice, whatever it might be. And they might be there for the whole time, potentially, if you need them there for the whole time. But if you don't need the person there any longer, you really should ask them to leave with everyone else. We in the case I just talked about, our hearing officer had a good quote that I've stolen, and she said that executive session is not a spectator sport. It is meant for the board members. It is meant for you to be able to deliberate on issues. If you need the assistance of people to do that, that's okay. But if you don't need somebody there any longer, and it's really just a discussion among the board members, it should remain a discussion among the board members. And then last but not least with executive session, just a quick thing on agendas. Try to be specific, avoid just having, a 1 or 2 word item on the agenda. The commission has had cases where we've said, if you just put executive session personnel, if you just put executive session security, that is a violation of the notice provision. So better agenda items, discussion of, security upgrades to Harding High School, discussion of, the performance of a high school principal, discussion of, potential acquisition of land for recreation fields, something that is a little bit more than just a 1 or 2 word answer.
You mentioned a discussion of performance of a high school principal. Do you have to name the particular principal?
So you don't have to identify the specific individual. Obviously, like if it's the superintendent, then you only have one superintendent, so people are going to know who it is. But yeah, you want to. The idea, what I try to tell people is the topic is kind of fair game. People get to know, generally what the topic of an executive session is, or they should know if you do the agenda correctly. They don't get to know who said what or what is being discussed about that. Generally, I think, if we see a performance on a, executive session, we're going to think it could be bad, but it could be good, right? It could be that the person's doing really well and you want to, I don't know, give them a raise or something, right? You're talking to them about how they're doing a good job, but it doesn't mean that you're going to have to identify the person or specifically say, what the specific issue is. And I think you had a question too, right?
Again, just want to touch on it for myself. Must be voted 2/3 to go into second session. If there's not a 2/3, and there is still an executive session, meaning that you're brought to, or either electronically or in person, and they go, what are the issues that can,
Like what could the commission do in a case like that? Yeah, so you need to have the 2/3 vote. So, sometimes what the commission does when something is done improperly in executive session, we could do a couple things. We could go back, I talked earlier about the nullification. So, potentially the commission, we could look at this and we could say, whatever vote, you had this executive second discussion, you voted on something, we're going to wipe out the vote because, that wasn't done properly. What we could also do is, In some instances, we have said, if you discuss something in executive session that should have been discussed in public session, we can issue an order and ask you to create minutes of the executive session. To the best of your ability, you're ordered to create minutes, disclose what happened in that executive session, because that conversation should have been done, in a public session. It was not permissible to go into executive session to do that. So it's a couple things there, that could happen.
So my eyes ding because you mentioned the word vote, and I thought there's no voting in the executive session.
No, I'm saying that, but potentially if the executive session discussion preceded a vote on something, the commission could consider, whether or not that vote was proper or not, because, the whole discussion should have happened in public and then they voted on something. So, but I've seen the minutes thing too, again, like we can order you to disclose what you did in the executive session. And I'll just say, FOI complaints about executive sessions are, they can be very difficult because, obviously people don't want to disclose what was said in the executive session, but, you're under oath at the FOI commission. You're going to have to answer questions kind of about, what was said in general. It might even be in generalities, but it could be a very difficult thing. So, if you're doing executive session, make sure you do it the right way and make sure that you're going in for, a valid reason. Any questions on executive session? All right, so we'll do a little bit here on records. I know you've got the whole packet there, so I want to cover, really kind of the basics, talk a little bit about dealing with records requests and some of the exemptions. We're not going to have time to get through every exemption in detail, but if people have questions, I'll save a little bit of time at the end, for that as well. So kind of like when we started off by looking at, the definition of a public meeting, I think it's important to look at the definition of what a public record is under the FOI Act. And the reason I think it's important is that you see how broad it is. Any recorded data or information relating to the conduct of the public's business. That is what makes something a public record. If it relates to the conduct of the public's business, does it have to do with school board business? That is what makes it a public record. It doesn't matter, what kind of record it is. It could be digital, it could be hard copy, it could be a video, it could be an email. And also, important to note that it's not just things that you create, it's also all the stuff that you receive. If somebody writes a letter to the Board of Education, that is a public record now. Also, you don't see anything on there about the device that it exists on. And this is where, we run into the issue sometimes of personal devices. Now, it is not an FOI violation to use a personal device for board business. And, as in my experience dealing with a lot of boards, it's almost, it has to be done, right? It's, the city or the school board is not going to buy you all cell phones to give to you to serve on the board. So you're going to be using your personal cell phones. Some districts, you might have a board email that you might use. Some places they don't. But if you're sending emails or text messages and they pertain to board business and they're being sent from a personal device, those are still public records. Now, it doesn't mean that somebody needs to go looking through your personal device. That's usually the first thing people get nervous about. But what it does mean is it means that somebody could make an FOI request, for example, I want all the text messages between the chair of the board and the superintendent, about the bomb threat, that we had on Thursday or whatever. And somebody could make that request, and then the chair would have to go through her messages and she would pull out any responsive records that she had, and she would, provide those to whoever's going to help facilitate the FOI request. So doesn't mean your phone becomes open for public inspection, but the records that you create, emails, text messages, and the like, are still public records if they deal with public business. Now, if two board members are friends or their kids go to the same school or something and they're talking socially, that's a different story. So again, it doesn't just mean that, every time you communicate with a board member, it's automatically a public record. It still does have to be about, about board business. But, I would just say that the person who had this job before me for a number of years, Tom Hennick, he got it as a gift and he actually left it for me. I have a little thing on my desk that says, when in doubt, don't press send. I just think that's something that, is important for everyone to remember. If you're serving on a board or committee and you send emails, those are public records, and I've run into situations, maybe not something that's, come up here before, but, there are people who, if they feel they're aggrieved by an agency, they'll go and make a request and they'll say, I want every email with my name in it. And if you were writing emails about somebody and you're using their name and you were saying things that weren't nice, they're going to have to, they might get those emails, under FOIA. So, just to remember that, if we're talking about public business, if we're talking about the the ongoings of the school district, those are public records, whether it's on a personal device, whether it's on your city email, whether it's on a city device, it doesn't really matter. And, the presumption under the FOI law is that if it is a public record dealing with the, public's business, then it is available for inspection and available for copies, except as otherwise provided by any federal law or state statute. So that one sentence there in the second paragraph really does a lot of heavy lifting. And what it means is that, if there are other laws that say something is confidential, the teacher evaluations we talked about, FERPA we talked about, or there are exemptions that are right in the FOI Act, attorney-client privilege, draft documents, safety and security. We'll go through some of the highlights with those in a second. So, unless there is a law to the contrary, the record has to be disclosed. So what I try to tell people is, if you are going to deny somebody's request for information, or if you're going to redact things from a document, there really needs to be some kind of statutory basis to do that. You can't not give somebody information because we don't like this person, or you can't, deny an FOI request because, we're worried about what the person is going to do with this information. The law really is kind of, it doesn't look at the motive of the requester. It really doesn't matter. Quite frankly, they don't have to tell you why they want the information. And even if they told you, hey, I'm getting this information and I'm going to write a newspaper article and I think you guys are doing a lousy job, that doesn't matter. It doesn't pertain to whether or not they get the information or not. What matters is the public record or not, and then are there any exemptions or exceptions to disclosure of that particular record? Does anyone have any questions on any of that?
Determines that.
Determines what?
It is, if it falls under one of those exemptions.
So, that is kind of different agencies do it differently.
Places that.
Who polices it?
Yeah.
So, that's something the commission often looks at. Typically what'll happen is, you might get if an FOI request comes into the district, they're going to prepare the documents. They're probably going to have an attorney look through it, review it, see if there's exemptions that need to be made. And then they're going to give it to the requester. If the requester thinks that, exemptions were made or redactions were made improperly, or things are withheld improperly, that person can file a complaint with our commission. And then what would happen is we would order the district to give us the full and complete unredacted records. And then we would review them. One of our attorneys would review them confidentially and then make a determination about what needs to be disclosed and what doesn't need to be disclosed. Yes.
Yeah, follow up on that, probably in the same vein. Just trying to get ahead of something right here, because we'll be discussing contracts, employee contracts.
Mhm.
But not outside the bargaining unit, executive level contracts. Is it okay to redact the names on a contract? Or should the whole contract be discussed?
I wouldn't think you would redact the name of
So
somebody.
the name, title, and position, everything should really be disclosable for.
Yeah, I mean, I think a contract for a public employee, I don't think there would be a lot in there that would be, things that would be redacted. With personnel files, which that would fall under, the standard, we can talk more in detail about this in a second, is you don't have to disclose anything that would be an invasion of personal privacy, but I don't imagine there would be a lot in a contract that would be an invasion of personal privacy. I mean, if there were, I don't know, if there were references in there to how many children somebody had or something like that, your health plan will cover you, your spouse, and your 4 kids, maybe information about somebody's family or something like that. But, the contract about what they're getting from the district, they're being paid this, they get a stipend, they get a car, they get a retirement allowance, all that kind of stuff, is going to be, public.
Clauses.
Public information.
Yeah, I would think a contract, there's not going to be a lot of redactions that are going to be made.
That's not personal.
Okay, so what are we right here? So next we'll move on to just kind of an overview of some of the different aspects of public records, part of the law. The last point there, I mentioned it earlier, but just bears repeating again, FOI request, it's about providing information that we have kind of at our fingertips that's available to us. We're not doing research. We're not creating records that don't already exist. With research, I like to say you have to search, you don't have to do research. What's the difference? Well, research is really when somebody is asking you to kind of make evaluations about something. If somebody sends you an FOI request, they could ask for, copies of test scores. They can't tell you, can you tell me, why the reading scores went up this year? Can you explain to me why, this number went to this number? Can you tell me why, you decided to change this in the budget? You don't have to answer questions. You're not required to do research. It's really providing access to records. It's not about making determinations. It's not about answering questions. It's not about making evaluations. you might have to search for records and determine, what is within the scope of a request. That is not research. If somebody asks for emails for a particular date and you have to pull up the thing and search for the date, that's a little bit different, but you don't have to do research. How can somebody make an FOI request? There's no requirement that it use a specific form. So if you have a preferred way to do it, you can have a form, or you could have a link on your website or an email. You ask people to send it to, but really any written request for records is an FOI request. So that could be an email, it could be a letter. It doesn't really matter how it comes in. Just a little bit about fees for public records. So if somebody wants to inspect public records, they are allowed to make a request to inspect public records. So it means that they don't necessarily have to always request a copy. They could ask to come, to the district offices and ask to view a file. If they do that, there's no charge. For electronic records, there's generally not going to be charges for electronic records, except in really kind of special circumstances. What the law allows is that if somebody requests an electronic copy of a record and you can reasonably make them that electronic copy and deliver it to them electronically, you're obligated to do that. So if somebody is asking you to email them a report or something like that, and you can email it to them, there's not going to be a charge for that. If somebody requests a lot of records and it's so large, maybe you can't email it and you have to put it on a flash drive or a disk, you could charge the cost of that flash drive or disk. The universal paper records is really shrinking, but if you still have records that are on paper, you don't have to digitize them. You can make photocopies, and then you could charge somebody 50 cents a page for photocopies of those records. There is a provision in the law that allows people to use a handheld scanner to scan their own copies of records. If they want to do that, then they have to pay a $20 fee. You see in there it says not cell phone, and that's just because kind of a quirk in the way the law is written is that it defines handheld scanner in such a way that it cannot include a cell phone. You could allow someone, if they wanted to use a cell phone to take pictures. If you decided you thought that was appropriate, you could allow them. Some towns, they do that, and then they ask the people to pay the $20 fee. But you could also tell people, if they take their phone out and start taking pictures, you could say, hey, we prefer that you don't take pictures. If you want copies, we'll charge you, the 50 cents a page, and we'll make you the copies. So that's kind of an overview of just sort of different, things there with the fees and any of that. Is there any questions on anything there? And again, most of this is probably not, things that you might be handling in your day-to-day. One thing I will mention, just, you might want to know as board members, there are a few instances where public agencies have to waive fees, and one of them is if you are a board member. So if you're requesting information as a board member that you need for the purposes of your service on the board, really from any, it could also be from the city, doesn't necessarily just mean the Board of Ed. So if you request information from the city, they're supposed to provide it to you at no cost because you're a board member and you're using it for your board work. Okay, how long do I have to fulfill an FOI request? This is probably the number one question that I get from people. And the hard part is there's really not a specific time frame. The standard is promptness. And we'll talk about that. There is one, I should step back. There's one specific time frame, and that is you have to acknowledge a records request within 4 business days of receiving it. So it's really important, as board members, it may be that there's other people who deal with FOI and it may not be a responsibility of you. But if you get an FOI request, if someone sends an FOI request to you as a board member, you want to make sure somebody responds to them within 4 business days. You don't want to say, well, I'm a board member, I'm not in charge of this, I'm just going to let it sit in my mailbox. If somebody made a request to the chair of the board and the chair didn't respond, or nobody from the district responded within 4 business days, that would be considered a denial of that person's request, even if you didn't intend to deny it. Even if you said, yeah, we're going to get to it, we're just really busy right now. You never respond to the person. They have no way of knowing that, you're, that you're working on it. They have no way of knowing that you've received it. So they could file a complaint after those 4 days. So first things, if you get an FOI request, just make sure you get back to the requester and you respond. And then after that, how long until they get the information? Well, as I said, the standard is promptly, and it's not defined in statute. So we had this advisory opinion that the commission came up with going on 40 plus years ago. And we look at all those different factors that you see there in that last bullet point. So we look at the size and scope of the request, how many records have been requested, the amount of personnel time necessary to comply with the request, recognizing larger and more complex requests. You're going to be allowed more time to get them done. We also look at, really kind of information the requester may or may not give you in the request. Do they say anything about the time frame by which they need the records, or do they say, how important it is to them to obtain the records or the information contained within the records? what that means is, if you got two FOI requests on the same day and, somebody, had some sense of urgency or gave you a deadline or something, it's a factor to consider. And you might say, well, this person is, saying that, they really need this information by the start of February. I think we can get it done. Let's work on this. Let's get this done by the beginning of February. Maybe we've got another FOI request we've been working on for a while. It's a lot larger. Let's put that one to the side for a minute. We're going to work on this other one. So it's just something to consider. Doesn't mean that if somebody asks you to do something by a certain deadline that if you don't do it, that you're going to be in violation. It still, is meant to be this balance. It's really a balance between the rights of the requester under FOI and all the work that you guys have to do to make sure that things are running smoothly in the school district. You see it up there, the importance of the public of completing other agency business without losing personnel time to complying with the request, and also time constraints that you may be under to complete other work. Example that comes up a lot in school districts is, if somebody were to make an FOI request near the end of a school year, that's a very busy time for the district. They've got all these graduations, they're doing all the year-end data, there's all these things going on. And it may mean that if somebody makes an FOI request the last week of school, it might take the district longer to get back to the person because they've got all this stuff they've got to get done. We get to the end of June into July, okay, we're taking a breather, now we've got more time to work on your request. It is meant to be, this balance really, as I said, it's meant to be a reasonableness standard. My advice is that, if you're dealing with an FOI request at all, you're dealing with requesters, I just think communication is really, really important. I just think that, sometimes I think, we're afraid to tell people bad news. We're afraid to tell them, hey, this is going to take a while, or, hey, there's 15 other FOI requests that we got to get done before we can get to yours. My advice would be, I think it's better if you're upfront and you're transparent and you just kind of explain, what you're doing. And also if somebody checks in along the way and they're asking for updates, you're not required to give them updates, but I think if you can, it never hurts. One of the things I do with the commission is I review the complaints that we get in and help to assign the ombudsman to the complaints. And, the number one thing I see where somebody files a complaint after a records request is usually when they don't get any response. They might get an initial acknowledgement, but then months go by, they're asking for follow-ups, they're just saying, hey, what's going on? Just checking in, haven't heard from you. And they don't get any response for months and months and months. And then eventually they get frustrated enough that they, start looking around and they, wind up at the commission, they file a complaint. So I think a dialogue with the requester, giving documents on a rolling basis, I think that's something that sometimes gets overlooked, is if somebody asks for, a lot of information, years worth of financial information, maybe you go through the reports month by month and you're giving them the information, every week you're going to give them, months of worth of reports that you've had a chance to review, rather than wait until the end when you've looked through everything and then give it to them all at once. Yes.
A quick question. We're talking about timeline, extended delays and this and that. Is there anything wrong with responding promptly to a record request if you have it in your possession? For instance, if we have a document that was discussed at a board meeting that's in every single board member's possession that we used to make a decision and somebody asked for it and you got it easily available. Anything wrong with sending them?
No, I would argue, those types of cases, I think that would be something that hopefully you turn around and do it, very quickly, especially if it was something that was like in the packet or was discussed at the meeting, those sorts of things. My sort of general rule is, look, if it's an easy FOI request, if it's simple, I would say try to get those ones, just try to get those off your plate. If it's more complex and it requires more time, I would let the requester know, hey, this is going to involve FERPA. We're going to need you. I know it's about your son or daughter, but we're going to need you to go through the process for FERPA. Or, we've got to talk with our attorney about this because there's information in here we need to redact or black out or whatever.
Just to go a step further, even if it's a draft document that's been discussed extensively by the board and is in all the board's possessions.
We can, we'll talk about drafts in a second. If it's I would argue, I think generally if it's in the board's possession and they've been discussing it for a long time, it may not be a draft under FOI anymore. You may consider it to be a draft, but if you've been publicly discussing something, then
Not
not an executive. Yeah, if you're publicly discussing something, then the draft thing kind of goes away. The way the commission looks at drafts is once the decision makers are involved and they're starting to do what they do with it, then it becomes, something that would need to be disclosed. Now, it might be a draft when the district is preparing it. District staff might be coming up with recommendations to give to you guys. And while it's kind of still at the district, you haven't received it back yet, then it would, potentially be exempt. But once it goes to you in your packet and you guys are starting to talk about it and make decisions based on it, I think at that point, it would have to be disclosed.
Thank you.
Okay, so again, that's promptness. Exemptions and exceptions. So there are exemptions and exceptions to the, to the FOI law. There are exemptions that are in our law in section 1-10. There are exceptions that are in other, other state statutes. Some of these we talked about FERPA, some of these other statutes we've discussed as well, public school teacher evaluations, and just, I gave a couple other examples there to cite. So this is a not comprehensive list of some of the exemptions that are right in the FOI law. And I'm going to kind of go through these a little bit of a lightning round, but just touch on a few things I think are important for each of them. And then if anyone has any questions on any of those, feel free. And then there's just one other thing I want to just get to before we wrap up. So preliminary drafts and notes, we kind of already touched on this one. There is an exemption for that. Preliminary draft, again, really means pre-decisional. It means the records and things, reports and things that you might ask for that, before they're given back to you to make a decision about them. If you are asking the district to, give you, enrollment numbers, maybe there's a good, consideration of consolidating schools or something like that. And they're pulling all the data together and maybe it's not all complete yet. And they need to wait until, the last day that people can enroll because people might have moved here and they're waiting to get the counts and they're working on this. And, but maybe it was mentioned at a meeting that this report was asked for. And some reporter the next day says, oh, I want the report. Well, if it still is with the people who aren't going to make the decision, they're still developing it. It might be exempt as a draft document. With draft documents, I will just say, though, that there needs to be a public interest in withholding the document that outweighs the public interest in disclosure. So yeah, even if it's a draft, there needs to kind of be a reason. Hey, it's a draft. We can't give it out because of, whatever the reason may be. And as long as it's a valid reason, the commission's not going to, second guess your judgment there, but just keep that in mind. If it's a draft, there's got to be some kind of reason that we're withholding this as a draft. We don't want to cause confusion. We need to talk to other people before we can complete this report, whatever the issue might be. Do you have a question? Okay. All right. So personnel or medical files that would be an invasion of privacy if disclosed. So, this is pertaining to personnel files of employees. What I say when I do this for, groups of public employees is, I tell them, well, if you didn't know, you know now, most of the information in your personnel file is public. Really, the things that are not going to be disclosed are really kind of medical, personal, family related, those kind of things. Things about your conduct as an employee, good, bad, or indifferent, are going to be public records. Obviously, there's an exemption for evaluations of teachers, but that doesn't pertain to disciplinary investigations. That was they made that clear in that statute. Disciplinary investigations are still public. Resumes when people apply for jobs, that goes in a personnel file, that's public. Letters that you get related to different things. I got a letter because they found out they were overpaying me and I had to pay back the state some money. There's a letter about that in my personnel file. You can FOIA that if you want to. So they're really personnel files. There's a lot of accessibility in there, but there is a protection if it's a privacy issue. And if there is a privacy concern, the law does say, kind of like the executive session, you go to the employee, you ask the employee, and if the employee says, I think this is a privacy issue, then you don't release the record, and then the person can go to the commission and ask the commission to look at the matter if they would like.
I got a question of clarification for employee discipline hearings. I think we've probably been doing this wrong for decades. And I've seen somewhere where it says the evidentiary portion of the hearing should be in public, but the discussion could be in executive.
I think I know what you're referring to, and I think it's something to do. Again, I think that's kind of in the education statutes issue thing because there's. But what you're saying to me is what I recall. I don't remember the specifics of it, but I think there's a requirement that part of it be done in public and part not. I can look into that more.
Yeah, please.
Too. Yeah, send me an email or something, and I can find it because I think it's something that's not in FOI. It's an education statute thing that there's part that's done publicly and part that's done privately, and then also with disciplinary hearings too. this is kind of outside the scope of FOI, but sometimes, collective bargaining agreement spells out, how certain things are done. And obviously you have to follow that, as well. So. You have a question?
No, I'll wait to find that out. I don't think I agree with him, but that's right.
Yeah, so I think there's something. I don't know which way it works, but what you're saying brings a bell with me, but it's just not something that comes up all that often. But I can look into it and let you know, because I feel like I looked into this for somebody else, so I can try to find that. Yeah, I don't want to be definitive on that because I'm not sure. Okay, so certain law enforcement records, there's a lot of exemptions for law enforcement, things like witness statements, identities of juveniles, juvenile arrest records, information about victims, and so on. Records relating to pending claims or litigation, this is really about, maybe there's a lawsuit and there's a proposed settlement agreement or something like that. It's shared with the board for their consideration, that would be exempt. Trade secrets, this goes back to what we talked about earlier, where, I think you had said, a company telling you, hey, you can't disclose this information. Well, if it's a trade secret, you wouldn't have to disclose it, but I don't believe that would be the cost of the textbooks, to the district. It doesn't seem like, that would arise to a trade secret, but maybe, specific information about the content of the textbooks, depending, I don't know what they consider to be proprietary. The idea is that, you're not required to disclose things that would put that business at a competitive disadvantage, so if you know something about their product because you guys, are in a contractual relationship with them, their competitor can't necessarily come in and ask for the information that, they're only disclosing to you because you're you're buying the textbooks from them, or sometimes it's that you're serving them some kind of regulatory role or something like that. So test questions, scoring keys, and other examination material. This is not about, the math test, but it's about employment, applications. So, you can't FOI the interview questions, for an interview or something like that, and also if, it comes up in police departments and fire departments a lot, that there's a lieutenant's exam and there's a way that it gets scored and there's a key and this gets weighted this way and this gets weighted this way. Those records are not, don't have to be disclosed, to protect the integrity of the hiring process. Real estate appraisals while an acquisition of property is pending. That's pretty straightforward. Records related to collective bargaining strategy and negotiation. Similarly, we talked about how you can do that in executive session. Also, this is, would cover the records. So if there were, emails or other, a draft of a proposed, wage agreement or something like that, if it's strategy, if it's negotiations going back and forth, that could be something that wouldn't have to be disclosed. Attorney-client privilege, really the key thing there is, it's communication with your attorney, for the purposes of legal advice. It could be that the attorney's giving you legal advice. It could be that you're giving information to the attorney to provide legal advice. It doesn't matter which way it's going. That would be something that would be protected by attorney-client privilege. The next two don't really come up all that often. Information obtained by use of illegal means, whistleblower complaints. Adoption records, there's some availability to people who, maybe are involved with the adoption, depending on the situation, but, those are not generally available. Plans and records that pose a security risk. It's just important with this one to know that there's a process where, if an agency wants to claim this exemption, they have to go seek a security determination. So for cities and towns, what you would do is, you would probably run it up your internal system to your superintendent or security person to try to help make this determination. If they think there's a valid security issue, essentially, if you think disclosing the records, would put somebody in harm's way or, reveal, sensitive security information about, building or facility, you go to the state police would review the situation. They have attorneys there to do this. And, they would make a determination and say, yes, you guys don't have to disclose that record. It would be a security issue. The reason you consult with somebody else, one, it's required by statute, but two, if there's an FOI hearing, then those security people would come to the FOI hearing. So it would not just be Bridgeport Board of Education, it would be Bridgeport Board of Education and the state police testifying about why there's a security issue here. And the commission is going to give a lot of weight, to the testimony of those security experts because they're really the experts to make those types of judgments. And then last but not least, there's an exemption in the law. It's a little bit of a newer one, not new, but it, maybe within the last, 10 or 15 years. Dealing with responses to bids or an RFP. And what it does is it allows for the records to remain confidential until the contract is awarded. And because of that, it means that as a board, you guys can go into executive session to review responses to an RFP or to review bid documents that you've received. So you could have an executive session to review them. You could invite the bidders in to meet with them in the executive session. Once you award the contract, everything becomes public. So once we pick somebody, to put the new roof on the school, then all the bids, including the people who lost, all that information becomes public. Or if we decide that we don't like any of the proposals and we go out to bid a second time, then once we are done with that round, we're ending negotiations, then the records of those bids would need to be disclosed. So it's a limited exemption only for that period of time. It's a little bit unique in how that works. But again, it allows you to have an executive session if you wanted to review bids for something before you award a contract. So again, those are, it's not every exemption in the FOI law. There's about 26 or 27. Another one pertinent to school districts, just to mention, is that names and addresses of students enrolled in public schools. There's an exemption for that. So, somebody's not allowed to ask for the roster of, students at a particular school. The big one though is not an FOI, and that's FERPA, which you might be familiar with. Obviously you can't disclose, identifying information about the individual students. Parents want information. There's a process through FERPA how they can get that information. Does anyone have any questions about any of these exemptions or any other records that you're kind of wondering if they're exempt or not?
Records related, this has come up in the past few board meetings as far as, board packets being posted online, posted for public availability before the meeting. It said that we're the only district in Fairfield County that doesn't post our board materials for public viewing before the meeting.
So there's no requirement under FOI to post the materials ahead of the meeting. There was during COVID a period of time where there was an executive order where it was required because the meetings were remote. So the idea was, well, people can't go to the Board of Education office to get the information, or everyone's working from home, so put it all on the website. So you do not have to post your meeting materials ahead of the meetings on the website. I think if you can, I would say, what's the harm, right? If you prepare a board packet and you have it available, and you can put it on the website, I would say, why not just do it? So somebody, if they're following along from home or whatever, they can, look at the agenda, they can look at the items as people are going through it. But it is not required by the FOI law. I don't think it pertains to board packets, and this is something that is separate from our laws. I know there are some education statutes, and I think it's about contracts. I don't know if this is ring a bell with anyone? No. So there is I think there's and I can look into this more. There was something that was done recently, not in FOI, but it was done in the education statutes requiring Board of Education to post certain materials to their website. And I believe it was like the contracts for, I think just like a teacher's contract and superintendent's contract or something like that. I don't think it was the meeting materials. So sometimes there are requirements about what needs to go on your website, not in FOI, but for meeting materials, you don't have to do that.
Thank you.
Again, if you can, I don't think it's a bad idea. But if you're running off the packets, an hour before the meeting, then you might not have time to, post them, on the website. Sometimes not everything is ready for you get it, you might walk in here and that's when you get part of the agenda or something. I don't know, but, it's not required.
Thank you.
Any other questions anyone have about any of these exemptions? Okay. And then last but not least, we already talked about these and probably went through all those details. I'm just going to end on this slide because people sometimes ask about this. What do we do if we have somebody who, we think has gone too far, they're making too many FOI requests, they're starting to become really, really maybe vexatious. So what I'll say, a couple things about this is that the term vexatious is not defined in the statute. The way it works is kind of like with promptness, we've got these different factors that we consider. So we look at the number of requests that have been filed, how big those requests are, the nature, content, language of the requests, or any other communications to the agency. And really what we're looking for is a pattern of conduct that amounts to an abuse of rights granted under the FOI. So what can happen is if there's somebody who meets this standard, the district could file a petition with us and say, look, we've got somebody who we believe is a vexatious requester, and we would look at the petition, and if we think there's enough there to move forward, we would hold a hearing, we would bring you, we would bring the person, they would have an opportunity to defend themselves, you would have an opportunity to tell us, why they're being such a jerk. And what we could do is the commission could say that you guys need to no longer entertain any FOI requests from that person for a 1 year period. We do take this really seriously. You know, we are the FOI commission. We don't want to, you know, restrict people's rights to request information, but you know, when it goes too far, when it becomes, you know, about abuse, about harassment, when it becomes intimidation of public employees, threatening language, you know, when it gets to the level of where it is not somebody asking for information any longer, it's really somebody trying to interfere with the agency operations, you know, those sorts of things. Then that would be when I would say that, you know, this might be applicable. But people are allowed to make a lot of FOI requests. There's no limit on how many FOI requests somebody can make. They can make large FOI requests. So I think this is really, you know, it's the volume, but it's also the conduct. You know, it's one of those things where, you know, again, I kind of think of it as the break glass in case of emergency of FOI, right? You know, this is really kind of a last resort option. I think, you know, commendably, I think most districts and cities and towns, you know, work with the difficult people pretty good because we don't get a lot of these. I think people try to work with people if they're looking for information, they're trying to figure out what happened. But, you know, if you've got somebody who, you know, you're trying to work with them, you've tried, it's not going well, you know, you're running out of options, then this is, you know, a tool that is available that you could potentially pursue. Anyone have any questions on that? Oh, so just going to go all the way back to the beginning for anyone who didn't get it before to my email and phone number. You know, please don't hesitate to reach out. You know, if you've got any issues in the future. You know, sometimes you know, a 2-minute call to FOI could save you a huge headache. You know, and I do try to be accessible. You know, I understand sometimes you're having to make these decisions. You know, and there's a time element to it. So. You know, when people email me and call me, I really try to get back to them and, you know, as quick as I can. You know, I'm out a lot doing a lot of training. So, you know, I sometimes tell people if you call me and I don't get back, send an email. Because sometimes I'm checking that a little bit more frequently. But, you know, we covered a lot. And as I said at the beginning, I know there were some issues here and some complaints and that sort of thing. But, you know, I hope now everyone, you know, has gotten an understanding of what the requirements are. And, you know, I just can't emphasize enough that, you know, with FOI, because it's the law, we want to do it right. If you're not sure, it's really okay to ask questions, whether that's to us, whether that's to, you know, your attorneys, or, you know, even if you have people in the district that have been around a long time, that have done it for a long time. You know, the law has changed in some ways, but a lot of this has been the same for a long time. So I would just say lean on the resources that you have, because, you know, you guys are all, you know, volunteer board members. You all bring different expertise to the board. You know, chances are you're probably not an expert in FOI, and that's okay. Right? We want people who have different expertise and different knowledge and bring different things to a board of education. You can always, you know, I was at another meeting and I was telling people, you know, look, you can always learn FOI. I can always teach you how to do FOI. I can't teach you to be a good business person. I can't teach you to have been a teacher for 20 years. Whatever background, whatever expertise you bring to the board, it's really important, you know, and we can always be here to help with FOI. So I really appreciate all of the good questions and the invitation. And, you know, if you need me for anything else, you know where to reach me. And also, if you wear another hat, you know, and you think, hey, this training was great, you know, I'd like to see it done at whatever, you know, you work at City Hall in Stratford and you want me to come there, you know, just reach out and I'm always happy to come. So I really appreciate, you know, the invitation and all the questions. Thank you.
All right. Good night.
Thank you.
We are going to move on. We have one more item on the agenda, which is public comment, and one speaker, Joseph Sakalovic. Will be timed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Joseph Sakalovic. I'm at 334 Bridgeport Avenue. I'm speaking now as a member of the public. I think it would be appropriate for me to sit as a board member to speak about this.
Part of the game.
Excuse me.
Call for a point of information.
Hold on. I didn't say that, so he just did. Continue.
I volunteer.
Go ahead.
Yeah, this evening came about because of the FOIA complaints. This settles the last 2 FOIA complaints I filed against the Board of Education and the former chair. I felt to move on as a board in a new direction, that this board will no longer be running afoul of the Freedom of Information Act, and we will be moving forward in a transparent manner. I'd like to thank presenter. Very, very good, very, very informative, and I'm glad we got this settled, and I hope to move forward as a board in a more transparent manner than we have in the past.
The next item on the agenda is, adjourning, moved by Mr. Bennigan, second by Mr. Duna, all in favor?
Aye.
Me.
Any opposed? Time is 8:18. Have a great night.
Not everyone.